correspondence that I have with Cordell Johnson, who works with the New Hampshire Municipal Association.
This was you. That was you.
Oh, yes, yeah. We talked about that. Not something we consider, but I don't think something we can do.
Jeez, they put the clock way over there now.
Yeah, I know.
Got training earlier. Can't just subtly.
Tell you what.
Ah,
Will that help?
it looks like it's about right.
Will that help you?
Check on it. 7:08. Oh, good, it's ahead of time. Perfect.
I hope you don't mind if I sit here at the table. It'll make it easier for me to hear so that I can take better notes.
You should
If
be.
that's
No
appropriate.
Would you rather have more room? I can.
Oh, no, I've got plenty of room.
I'd be happy to second the item.
I think any of us would. We'll switch places. All right, let's see. 2, 5 plus 1, I think we're
Next,
good.
right.
We're good to get started at least. So I think we should get started, so I will call this meeting to order. The usual culprits are here. I mean, if we have a vote, Huntley, you will be
I don't
authorized.
think we take vote to the work session, do we?
If there's any requirement for a vote, he would be eligible to vote. So
Right, I just
I
thought
don't
that-
believe that we are going to have any votes.
I just thought because it's not necessarily a notified, gathering, that I just
Yeah,
expected.
the only thought I had was the possibility, and I'll bring it up now, the possibility that it might make sense for a smaller group of us to meet with Peter Malia.
Mhm.
And if that's the case, I don't know whether we need to take a vote to do that or not. And if we did, then you would be eligible. But other than that, I can't think of anything that would be appropriate for that.
Isn't Peter working for North Conway too?
He is.
Yeah. Okay.
It works for all the towns around here, doesn't it?
Well, at least a few, yeah.
Yeah.
So, we have received authorization to make use of his talent. Guess that was at the Board of Selectmen meeting yesterday? Good.
Tuesday.
Dick did his job, okay. All right, we're in a working session. STR. Scott's done a bunch of homework, so I'm gonna let him push forward.
And basically the homework I did is I just attended a webinar put on by the state, and then I followed up with some questions to one of the panelists, Cordell Johnson, who was also the one that talked at the planning conference that I went to and contacted before. A couple of general things, and then I'll get into the sort of recap of his more particular recommendations. The two general things are that really anything that we're doing now won't impact current short-term rental operations, because by New Hampshire RSA, they will be grandfathered. So we can take action to, regulate, limit moving forward, but what short-term operations are already in place, and we can't, unless we can show that they're illegal by our current zoning, we can't, that they'll be grandfathered. And then the second thing is that the approval and application process that we've been discussing, and there are a couple of different ways that we can do it, but really both ways, is not according to the property owner, it goes with the property. And so any approval that we make or that the Board of Selectmen makes, that approval can be transferred to the next property that the property, sells. And we can't require that there be a renewal of the application. We can require that there be inspections on a periodic basis for safety issues and things like that. But we can't have an annual application, nor can we require that the new property owner reapply for a property that's already gained approval. So approvals go with the property. Existing short-term rental operations are likely to be grandfathered. As far as I understand it, the only way that they might not be grandfathered is if we could show that by our definition of dwelling unit and hotels and home business occupation, that in some way short-term rentals are already not allowed, at least in the residential district. I don't think that we really can, but that would be the only way that existing operations wouldn't be grandfathered, as I understand it.
Scott, do you mean that anything that's in existence now is that way? But what if we make new rules and somebody applies for a short-term rental? In that case, after the fact, does that also stay with the property? Is it okay?
Yes.
Got it.
I don't know if there's any ability to put a sunset clause on that. If that use, if there's no short-term rental use for 10 years and it expires, I don't think so. But I kind of assume that once we approve a property for short-term rental, that use has now been approved.
Even if the property is sold and the person's using it for full-time?
In the same way that, if you have an inn that's grandfathered, in the residential district, an inn that's grandfathered, you can sell that inn and the next person can continue running it as an inn, even though it doesn't meet current zoning regulations.
Now, can we enforce, as I brought up before, I know of one particular place, homes that are two-bedroom house, two-bedroom septic, they're advertising as 3 bedrooms. Can we control that?
I don't think so. We
No.
can limit the occupancy moving forward. We can limit the occupancy that's marketed moving forward, but anybody that is currently, unless under the fire code, we can say you're not, you're over occupying that structure. And at that point, I don't think it has anything to do with short-term rentals. It's just how that approved structure is being occupied.
There must be other rules though, because I can't take a 3-bedroom house with a 3-bedroom septic and add another bedroom.
Right.
So you shouldn't be able to advertise as 3 bedrooms when it's a 2-bedroom house and 2-bedroom septic, because that's all it's been approved for.
You shouldn't be, but I'm not sure that currently we have a law in place that restricts that.
I think that would also apply if you just try to sell the house and you weren't a short-term rental. I don't think that you're supposed to advertise a 2-bedroom home as a 3-bedroom home if it's not.
No, I was talking to a real estate agent about that, and he can be sued if he sells a 3-bedroom house
Yeah.
that's only a 2-bedroom septic.
That's what I'm
Wouldn't
saying.
that be the application process? That you would establish that this is a 2-bedroom house, it has a 2-bedroom septic, that's what you can advertise.
Moving forward, we can apply those kinds of restrictions,
Can you
rules.
require that present short-term rentals require that they be inspected? And
for safety and,
I don't
health?
know. I don't know the answer to that question.
That seems,
I guess what I'm just saying is that if someone is doing a short-term rental now and is not breaking any current regulations,
That's all
we
grandfathered.
can't change that
Change the
use. That
well,
use is grandfathered.
didn't we hear it though from Jay last week, 2 weeks ago, that if you are renting your home to 7 people,
Mhm.
you're done. One family plus 3 unrelated
Right,
people,
so that would be-
that's already in our laws.
Right. If we have an existing law that's being broken, then
And council-
it's already being broken.
So, well, it is difficult to enforce, but it also sets a limit to your point around how many people can you really get in the house. Right now, the restriction is much more severe than I think what anyone is actually putting out there for their potential rental. When they're saying 10 or 12 people, maybe if that's one family, that's okay according to what I think Jay told us. But if it happens to be, 3 couples, you blew it. Or,
I mean, this grandfather thing will make all of this more acceptable. I mean, I had a very spirited conversation on Facebook today. This sort of got going with a letter that Paul Mayer put in the paper. And interestingly, was getting a lot of pushback, from people in Jackson who do short-term rentals until I said, and these are individual rights, you can't take these rights away, this is how, blah, blah, blah. As soon as I said, well, your grandfather, now we're getting somewhere, so.
so what would prevent everyone in town from putting themselves out on short-term rental between now and the time of March in order to secure their grandfather?
Nothing other than there is some sort of provision that if we're contemplating.
Yeah, as soon as you start, I don't know what, it may be the public hearing.
Yeah.
Once we have the words, excuse me, it's in place until town meeting. Once we've crafted the words and had that
Public hearing.
public hearing on it, it's in place until it's voted up or down at town meeting.
So between now and whenever we have a public hearing, everyone should jump onto the site.
Airbnb.
But even if somebody's grandfather, can't we look at their advertisement and then look up their septic design and say, incorrect?
That's a state issue anyway, isn't it?
And
That
that'd
would
be
be a state issue anyway, because
Yeah.
they're the ones that had to approve the septic.
And that'd be a question for Jay and Kevin. I just don't know the answer to
Yeah,
how
I,
we can apply current.
I just see it as a scenario that we would still have impact on a grandfather situation.
So I'll get to the more specific recommendations, which are a little more confusing even. And if you go through this, you sort of have to start at the back and come forward to the email threads. So the most current emails are on page 1, and then it's and you can kind of jump forward from the back to about page 5, because it's some preliminary discussion I had with him before we had a draft. It's on page 5, and I emailed him the draft of that we had. So it's on 4 and 5 that he responds to that draft. I then on page, moving forward, I asked him follow-up questions that he responds to. But basically, the path that we're on now,
The group, page 4 or 5.
yeah. So the path that we're on now, and it says, "Hi Scott, I was out of the office the last 2 days." That's the first sentence. Is we would be creating a conditional use, and the one difference between sort of the path we're on and how we probably would have to do it is that under the innovative land use control, RSA, we can create a conditional use like short-term rental, but it's really the planning board that should be approving any application. We can have the Board of Selectmen approve the application, but we would still have to review that approval. So that's the one sort of idiosyncrasy about that particular approach.
Then this would be for conditional,
That-
or
that-
for the, because we were talking about, they need to register.
Right, but if we're going to make those requirements, we would be doing it under this innovative land use RSA, and it would be a conditional use that we would be granting to someone that wanted to do short-term rentals. But that approval process generally is in the hands of the planning board under that innovative land use thing, not the Board of Selectmen. We can still specify that the Board of Selectmen do the initial approval. We would still have to review that approval afterwards, according to the law. But beyond,
Could it be done the other way?
Yeah, I would think it'd be done the other way around.
possibly, I don't.
It's like a subdivision, we get the subdivision. Here, the selectmen don't get it.
Right.
And we get to make the approval.
If
Right,
I just see
and
that,
yet if there's any issue, it goes through the building inspector.
So, beyond it just working that way, he said you ought to reference this RSA, and there's a few small changes that we would make to go that route. It's not, the traditional route. He emphasizes that we really need to talk to Peter Malia before we go much further.
What would happen if we, again, what would happen if we reverse it and said planning board does get to look at it first?
That's a question for Peter.
I mean, to the objection here, that it's an unusual thing, the other is not unusual, would be a more standard
Right, so
process.
the more standard process is that we make it an exceptional use, conditional use. More traditional approach will allow use under limits, it would be special exception. And so that would go to the ZBA for approval.
Now, because Keith kind of brought it up last time, and even though something's grandfathered, is if there is an issue, is there any way then you can enforce saying, well, we really would like you to have a local contact, so if something happens, the police can call them, they can come and check your property.
Again, unless it's not part of some regulation or a code already in place, and I'm not sure we can apply new rules to something that's already occurring. The one thing about going to ZBA, the special exception ZBA route, is that would require notices to abutters and a much more involved process than the application for a conditional use that would go through the planning board of the Board of Selectmen. That's essentially it. I did ask him about home occupation and whether we could call short-term rentals as home occupation, whether they're a business in the sense that they might be a home occupation but might not be legal because there's no resident on the premises. I don't think I think he kind of feels we're sort of halfway there in terms of our definitions. So I don't think we could say that, we can't get around the grandfathering thing by saying we already have definitions in place that make short-term rentals illegal. We could alternatively beef up our definitions to, in a way, exclude short-term rentals. I guess my personal feeling is that, when you're interpreting definitions, especially trying to, look at the intersection of multiple definitions like business occupation, home occupation and short-term rental and dwelling unit and hotels and lodging, that's where things get very confused and subjective in terms of how people think, what they think they say. And they have a regulation that says this is the way it should happen, as far as short-term rental.
Right,
So much
and
clearer way.
the problem there is you don't want to be too appear arbitrary.
Right.
But to be able to enforce it, you want to have clear cut,
Right.
Yeah.
something that can be measured
Right.
to distinct.
And that's where the application process comes in too, so that we have some data as to, where to, what to do. That's what I came up with.
Did you read the article in the, I assume everybody did, in the Conway Daily Sun today about what Conway did? Or apparently, so they had these 5 different things that sort of limited things, and then they sort of put it all back together again, where they combined 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 4 and 5.
I didn't
That's
see
a
it.
Kearsarge Lighting District.
It confused me, and, they started out with, well, it's gotta be owner occupied, well, then it really doesn't have to be owner occupied. What does the term owner occupied mean? Does somebody's gotta be there while it's rented? I don't
That they
think
live
that's,
there,
I'm sorry?
that it's their dwelling, their
That-
principal dwelling.
But then it sort of backed off of that, as I read it. It was confusing, but
I mean, I think that, there's no question that enforcement of all of this is challenging at the very best, and probably worse than challenging. But I also think that really, the short-term rentals is a very broad term, and it applies to a lot of different things that are going on. I think the one thing that, where there's the most common ground, and I think really what we're sort of focused on, is properties in the residential district that are essentially being run as businesses, that there is no owner or long-term tenant occupation of the property. Now, enforcing, if we restrict that, enforcing that is going to be difficult, at least, but anyone looking to purchase a property to just do that, the fact that they might get caught, that we might see it happening and enforce it, is going to be a huge dissuasion to investing in that property. And so I think it's still, in terms of limiting the type of short-term rental that we most want to limit, which is that business type thing, I think what we're talking about still has teeth, in that it will dissuade, future occurrences, because people just won't want to take that kind of risk with their money. And current ones are grandfathered anyhow, so, it doesn't matter. That makes plenty of sense.
Because the one I keep bringing up was these people built it specifically for a rental house. It's on Tin Mine Road.
on Tin Mine Road?
Yeah,
They
the
built
wife,
it.
the wife told me that, she didn't know who I was.
They built
I
it
was
for
up there
that.
doing a service call, huh?
They built it for that.
They came,
I mean, that gives you an idea of the profit, given the building costs these days. That
Well,
you
they-
can actually build a structure to do short-term rentals and have it be profitable.
they came with an attorney saying that they were gonna use the property for a family vacation home. The second service call when I went up there, she didn't know who I was, she says, no, we buy properties
Yeah.
throughout the country specifically to rent, and that's what they do, that's their business.
Right, a large part of the discussion that I had on Facebook today, and if you talk to any real estate agent in the area, what they're gonna talk about are second homes, and how important second homes are to the area, how important, rental income is to second homeowners to offset the cost of having a second home. And to a point, I don't disagree with that at all. They are important to the area, and some second homeowners really do need to have that supplemental income. But I do question how many second homes are actually second homes, or how many properties these days are being bought as second homes. Versus, I think second home purchasers, as much as new home purchasers, are now competing against short-term rental purchasers. The property on the Loon, the old dump road that I helped someone with, 5 offers on the table within 48 hours. Half of those offers at least were expressly short-term rental only. So even if, beyond the person for their own home, even if the other offer was for second home, they're competing as well as the person looking to make it a home with the short-term rentals.
So,
Yeah.
with that thought in mind, again, I think we've talked so much about what we do and don't want to do. But I'd like to understand whether or not somebody running, if the house is just there for short-term rentals, is that not a business? Is that not a business? How is that different from a lodging establishment?
I think it's because of that word residence that, means so many things that some people, because it's a residence, they say it's not really a business. To me, it looks like a business.
A resident, to be a resident, you have to live here. You can't obtain residency without paying a bill and actually being here. And so residency is a very strong word. It's not a floating word. It's not try to get registered to vote. You better be a resident.
Right, but that's the use. It's, is the property a residence or, that is, I mean, to me, it's pretty clear. It's a business. If all it's being used for is to rent, it's a one-room hotel. But semantics.
There's a lot of semantics there, because, I mean, somebody says, well, yeah, I rent it, but I'm up there with my family over Christmas, and then I come up for a couple of days in March or something like that. So they're not saying it's a residence, but they're saying it's owner occupied. So that's a tough one.
Right, and that one would probably be okay compared to the one that says,
Nobody ever comes up there.
well, where they own 62 properties.
Right,
This is
in the
one of-
same town, their name is on the deed.
And they're never here except to ensure that the property still exists.
How do you,
Well, you end up, you have to draw a line, somewhere you
Right.
have to draw a line, and,
it's a wiggly line.
what I was proposing is that we say, I put 12, but I think we could go to, 24 rentals in a year. I think that would give a second homer pretty reasonable supplemental income potential if they could rent out their place 24 times. And certainly if they were renting it a week at a time, that's, half a year.
Yeah.
But someone that's simply buying a property to rent and nothing else, 24 times a year is not going to make that a profitable property for them. So that, to me, is a line that, certainly there are some second homers that, we would like to rent their property more than 24 times, so it's gonna impact them. But I think, it's a reasonable line. No line is perfect. There's always winners and losers. But I think, 24 rentals to me seems like a reasonable place to put that.
How would you handle it then if somebody has a house and he has room for two renters at a time? And then, so 25 rentals for each room, or 25 total?
I would say, well,
I'd say go in the dwelling, not the owners.
yeah, I'd go with the dwelling. Where it gets complicated is if someone's renting separate rooms, and you go to
Yeah.
Airbnb and rent just a bedroom.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, some Airbnbs do rent just a room. That doesn't happen here all that often,
Right.
but in a city setup, that's not
Yeah,
uncommon.
I don't see, I think
I think it was,
being able to do 24 is good for this, I think that's reasonable for the second homer. There might be a way a short-term renter could work around that number and still make a property short-term rental only and make it profitable by finding a way of, doing something like that. But I just think the incidence of that, is gonna be very small.
just from the way,
I mean, it's an interesting query,
Right.
but I'm not sure that it would really be a problem.
so you can say per dwelling unit.
Dwelling unit.
Because you could have, 2 apartments.
Yeah.
And rent out each apartment, or you have 4 apartments in it. If you live in one, and you can rent out the other 3.
In that case, the way I understand what most of these proposals would be, is that you could, if you lived in one, you had 4 apartments, you could do short-term on each apartment for the whole time.
If you lived in one.
If you lived in one.
Yeah, and I guess personally, again, I'm willing to allow someone, if someone's on the property, whether it's the owner or a long-term tenant, I think, to me, that's another good compromise. We allow that property to be rented as many times as they want. You know, it helps.
So it would just be for those non-owner occupied
And non-long-term tenant occupied.
that would then be limited to 25.
Because I think,
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
think,
see you.
I think allowing someone to live on or long-term rent their property and do short-term rentals facilitates both a home and facilitates, you know, some additional short-term rentals. And again, short-term rentals themselves are good for the area. You know, they are.
Bring money.
They bring business in, but it's, for anyone that's used a short-term rental, it's just a more, you know, it's a better vacation experience, generally speaking. So they are a good thing for the area. We need to have a balance so that we still have a community that people want to visit too. And so it's just, you know, it's trying to find the line between all these different things that is going to be reasonable.
But I think we can find that line, I really do. I think that there's, you know, a lot of people on this side and a lot of people on that side, but in reading some of the letters to the Conway Daily Sun, I think that, you know, people are willing to meet in the middle somewhere, and I think it'll work. I mean, not gonna be easy, but
Basically, all you're trying to prevent, though, is just have a few controls of safety, and just before we start having issues in Jackson, just have a way to control it if we have a problem house.
Right.
And avoid the excesses.
I think it's gonna be easier in Jackson than some of the other towns like Conway, for sure.
It's easier in Jackson than it is in the city. I mean, we don't have this renting out rooms in a dwelling unit. Dwelling unit has to have a bed, a kitchen, and a bathroom. If you have those three elements, you've got a dwelling unit. Now, if they can cram that into a building 3 or 4 times, but the septic loading of that is different. It's not per bedroom, it's now bedroom kitchen. I don't care how many bathrooms you have, but you have a bedroom and a kitchen, that's a different loading. So you have that leverage to weigh in on it.
Just a kitchen with a disposal of that, you have to have 250 more gallons for a tank size for each disposal.
Just as an aside, I asked Julie Hoyt to put a sheet on the table that had the dates of when things had to be done by. Did you happen to find that?
Important dates?
Yeah, and I found a
I-
website too that sort of mapped it out.
Well, for zoning ordinances, there's a timeline that you have to have.
All right, for us, the critical date is Wednesday, January 8th is the last day to post and publish notice for first hearing on proposed adoption or amendment of zoning ordinance. So that's our critical date.
Okay, I just wanted you to have that in mind as our dialogue goes along. We're gonna get to crunch time, we're gonna have to decide on our words. What do we wanna do this year? And have it in a timely manner.
And I don't think we have to be perfect first time through.
No.
I don't think we have to be complete.
We can't think everything.
Because, for one, I think this is a moving target. To a large degree, the decisions that need to be made around, is it this or that, are going to be determined in the courts more than anything else. And we'll get better guidance probably from the court actions. But we need to start somewhere. And so I think we can start. we can put some baseline out there. As you said, once you start this process, you at least avoid the issue where one brother wants to be an Airbnb in the next 6 weeks or so. And grandfather themselves, so that every property in town would be grandfathered.
Well, I mean, this will go out in the notes, but
Yeah.
I mean, how many people read our notes? Is it something that maybe we ought to be more proactive in letting the people of the town know through something in Jackson News?
Again, it's like enforcement. You can only do so much. You can only lead the horse
Well, I just,
to water. Yeah, we can try and make it available to everybody. You have to put it in the newspaper, put it at the post office, at the library, here, on the radio. I don't know.
which I'm just thinking, Dick, is that if all of a sudden people see this in, you know, right before the town meeting and say, well, I didn't know any of this was coming, so maybe it should be.
And there are sort of two junctures where you could do that. One is prior to the public hearing, to get as many people to the public hearing as possible.
Yeah.
And then the second was once we vote on something that we're going to bring to town meeting, you know, then maybe we do an informational session just to make sure everybody understands
Well, that's
what
what
it
I'm
is.
talking about, right? You know, I don't want
It
to
can be
get
an informal, you know, just
to get to a point where everybody says, I don't know nothing about this, I'm not gonna do anything, and all of a sudden we're up against a stone wall, that's all.
What happens if a property that's a rental sells, somebody buys the property, tears the house down, puts up a house, uses it for themselves for a while, then sells it again, and they say this property was, you know, somebody else buys it that wants to rent, now is he gonna be grandfathered?
good question for Peter.
Right, that'd be a stipulation on alteration,
Basically, how-
part of the process of a building permit.
Because that's gonna happen a lot on Tyrell, well, as far as houses being
Might
torn
find
down.
wording. Excuse me.
Say that grandfather,
A house on
the house
Tyrell
rather than,
went up for 2 million and it sold 2 days later, and it may have been cash.
Which house?
It was on, I can't remember, Wildfire.
Wildflower, yeah,
Yeah.
10-acre property.
Yeah, beautiful property, it was all, but whammo.
It's not very well buildable because of the chain.
Oh, it's on the right. It's property right, after the road turns, it's dirt road, it's down
Yeah,
to
it's
the
a
right,
dirt road,
sits down
it's,
in.
it's below the, what is it, the Maccabees?
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, that was renting for a lot of money. It's been through a few owners, and it's gonna need a lot of work too, in the bathrooms.
Yeah, if you get 2 million cash, you can probably afford it.
Yeah.
I think I'll become a plumber, you say it needs to go bathroom?
A little more. Yeah, it's been leaking for about 10 years.
Wow.
All right, so for our initial go then, do we want to just make sure we have agreed then on what we're going to talk to Peter about to ensure that we're all on the same page? We're looking at requiring everyone to register, even grandfathered folks, we would require them to register. We'll be told whether we can or not, but our intention is to, and I guess what I'd like to do is find what our intention is, not necessarily what we're going to be allowed to do, but what
what would we like?
as a group, what is our intention? What would we like to see happen? And then we'll throw it on the wall and see what sticks, what doesn't, and what backup position we can get to.
If I were to throw out what we're intending to do, I would say that we're intending to find a plan that works for everybody, that somehow, and I wouldn't want to use the compromise, but I hate to, scare one side or scare the other side, and that we're trying to work out something that's acceptable to property owners and acceptable to to people that are renting their homes, and then rather than try to smooth the way, grease the
That's very general.
It is.
We have to come up with words that say, We want a registration process.
That's,
I agree with you.
I don't think anybody's gonna object to that.
Yeah, I agree with you, but I think what our task right now is to take what you just said and put it into very specific things that we expect that we will or won't do.
I don't disagree. I don't.
And actually, it's
it's
not what we won't do, it's what we will do, because we aren't gonna figure out what we won't do. The lawyer's gonna tell us what we can't do. What we should do is say what our intention is to do, not what our intention is not to do.
Not to worry about how to enforce it, not to worry about anything about, except what do we want to try to do?
Exactly, yeah, and I'm not sure what that is entirely yet.
That's what I mean. What we're trying to do is find something that's acceptable to all participants on either side or something like that. Maybe that's wishy-washy, but,
That might be a goal statement, but it's not a,
Objectives.
Well, we need what? Registration. We need just an inspection by the building inspector and the fire chief or fire inspector. And it would be nice to have some teeth if we did have a problem residence.
So you
again,
should decide on fees for registration, and then what the penalty would be if they don't follow what they're supposed to.
I would expect if we're gonna create a free fee structure, that it should equal whatever the town has to pay to, I think Kevin had said, what, about 3 hours of time, Jay had estimated 4 maybe. So somewhere between 3 and 4 hours of time, that would be added to their our cost of doing business as a town. And even though we're requiring it, it's like, we're saying, look, you wanna do this, great,
Right, here's a one-time $200 fee
whatever.
process. We do an inspection, life safety.
You get this, and that out of it.
give them time to pull out old bunk beds.
And what happens if somebody doesn't comply with that? I mean, what happens if somebody rents their house out and all of a sudden 11 or 12 people are there? Who's to monitor? Is Kevin going to go up and monitor? Is the police going to go up and monitor? Do we have a project manager going up and monitoring that? Because that's what happens.
Well, it doesn't have to be monitored. You can rely on neighbors making a report. The fact that we have a law does not mean we have to enforce every instance that law is broken. It means that we can't choose when to enforce it and when not to enforce it. But we don't have to discover every instance that it's not being followed.
So that's still after the fact too.
So we can monitor it as much as we want or as little as we want. Generally, with something like this, you really rely on neighbors to report that something's going on.
I think what you hold out there is the threat that they could lose their permit if they don't. So you're hoping that, that it's not gonna happen because they realize that it's, if I let 12 people in here from a fraternity and they cause a lot of whatever. So you're hoping the owner monitors that a lot better. So
Well, if the owner's like down in the city and they don't really know what's going on.
then they're gonna lose their permit.
Right.
Okay.
Simple as that.
And it would be nice if we did have a local contact, like he said, he rents a lot of Airbnbs, and he watches them for people.
And I think we can require at least an in-state contact. That's that agent of record thing, or whatever it's called. I don't know that we can require it to be in county or in town.
If I'm out of state and I got a bunch of places, I probably have a property manager. I got somebody going in there to clean it, so, there's gonna be that contact that.
But it's just that one time that ruins it for everybody.
Well, yeah.
I was talking to friends of ours that run a place over in Alice Head every year, and there's 2 bedrooms, and then there's a cottage, and with 1 bedroom in it. But the owner was telling them that he didn't realize it, but somebody came up, there was 12, 14 people and trashed the place and made a mess of it, and he's really sorry they rented these people, but that's after the fact. So how do you,
That's his problem. He, you know,
You
he
need
got it
to,
wrecked, he rented it to the wrong people, he didn't monitor, didn't have somebody there managing the property.
no
and-
matter how you look at it, it's still the owner's
Yeah,
responsibility.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Well, we did have an incident in Jackson where the kid showed up, said he had his father's credit card, which he did. He rented the property, it's off Pond Hill Road. And the house is very well maintained, beautiful home. Well, come to find out, it was a bunch of kids from a local school, private school, and they'd gone, they had a party. And they pretty much made a mess, there were beer cans and all kinds of things. I was talking to the owner, and fortunately, the father lived, his parents lived locally, his mother does, and
they
Thank
pennied up.
he took care of it all.
Thank God there weren't short-term rentals when I was that age. We only had Black Mountain Cabin.
Well, they had no credit cards.
That was our party
The
house.
kids didn't have credit cards, right?
That's when before they locked it, right?
That's exactly, yes.
Now, you never did that, Scott.
All right, so we've heard registration, we've heard that we'd like to have inspections, we'd like to have an in-state contact.
Within the inspection, I think that some wording for septic loading should be within the permit or the licensing.
In the draft, we had, or I put a thing about, maximum occupancy, and I think we that seemed to be very sticky, but where it seemed to make most sense was how it's marketed, because we don't really care so much about use, but someone marketing their house, 3-bedroom for 15 people, just invites problems. And so in terms of that septic loading,
well, that would
Yeah.
encompass, you say, for 2 persons for each bedroom listed on the town-issued building permit.
right.
So that would take that in, septic into account.
And because we're doing, I think we were all sort of in agreement that, someone could have 2 people plus a couple, kids in the room, and that really wouldn't be a problem. So that's the part why we switched it and saying, not saying this is use, but this is how it's advertised, because, no short-term rental advertises this many adults and this many children, it's just this many people. So that seemed to be the more efficient way to handle that.
Didn't Jay say it's over 7 people, that there were restrictions, so if they are advertising?
Well, there was that, and then there's a family thing, and that sounded
Yeah,
confusing.
it was.
And, what
You have a
define-
family of
what-
12 and that blows it away.
And what defines a family today, is also part of this. How extended is your family? Is it partner or is it married? You have lots of different.
And how about for parking, and that, did we discuss that? I know we discussed that before.
We did last time, parking in designated parking area.
Okay, because I know sometimes when I go home, there's a whole bunch of cars at school and stuff like that. It's nighttime, that's been going on, so they park their cars down there, I'm assuming. As long as they're not on the street.
At the Board of Selectmen meeting, Chief Burley brought up that if someone wanted to camp on town property, we really don't have anything that prevents that.
Oh,
Oh, wow.
We could get a homeless camp up here.
Right?
Get all those people from Los
Right there
Angeles.
on the soccer field, yeah.
Oh, they'll love it in January.
I think the one other thing that, we've discussed, and, whether we want to keep it or not, is do we limit the number of rentals in the residential district for properties that are neither owner occupied nor long-term tenant occupied? I.e., properties are being run as a business in the residential
And
district.
you count the ones that are grandfathered.
So those would be grandfathered and they would continue to exist.
So, but do they constitute part of the count?
Part of,
if you say, okay, you can only have 50 in the rural residential, and already you've got 30, does it?
No, I'm saying rentals per property, 24 rentals per
Per
each
property.
property.
Oh, okay.
The grandfathered ones wouldn't come under that law
Okay.
because they're already doing their thing.
Okay, so-
Any new ones would be limited to, you know, if you had a property
Mhm.
and neither the owner occupied it nor was there any long-term tenant, and it was a new approval, you'd be limited to 24 rentals in the residential district
At what time period, for a year or for half a year?
Well,
or
for
Per
any,
year.
For a year.
per year.
for any year, for any, either district.
Well, I-
Differentiate between?
Well, I think we can specify. I guess
Do we need to?
we don't. I mean, there aren't many properties in the commercial district that really would come into play, so I'm not sure. if it
Well,
matters.
and then all of the properties at Nestle and all of the properties at Wentworth would come into play.
Yeah. I mean, I
When you say not too
personally,
many, that's about 200 units.
I mean, I see,
That's almost 10% of our entire housing stock. What you just said, not too many, so
no, you're right.
I think maybe you might want to back away from it.
Well, I guess, again,
Not too many.
to me, what we're talking about limiting is sort of business operation. So I guess I don't know why we wouldn't allow it in the business district.
Right, no, I'm not disagreeing, but
And so that's why I was specifying residential district, is I just felt that if you're running a business in the business district, then I'm not.
why should we care?
Why should we care? I don't know if I put residential in
I know when we
Well, you're
first talked
saying
about
it
that, we
is,
said we did not want to distinguish
It's
between
permitted.
residential and commercial.
It's permitted in all districts.
Right, on this draft, I guess,
I'm just going to draft the word,
yeah.
the current draft. I assume this is the one you had for,
Right, I guess,
Community
right, and
ones.
I guess my thinking has evolved since this
Okay.
draft, that based on the discussions we've had, based on some of the more
Yeah,
current
so
discussions.
going forward, if we did that, somebody can build along the Route 16 corridor and that would be okay? Or in the village?
If we continue to, yeah, if we continue to have that as a part of the business, the commercial district. Again, building a place to then short-term rent it, is a much different calculation given building costs.
Right, and for example is on potential on something like that, is something like Dana Place, for example, where it is a commercial property, it's apartments currently, but
And again, I'm, short-term rentals are good for the area.
I'm not saying we shouldn't allow them.
I'm trying to come up
Trying to
with-
figure out a way to make sure that what we're saying is what we want to say, and we don't want to restrict if our intention is not to restrict. And if our intention is to do so, then we should be upfront about it. Either way, I mean, if our intention is to say, look, for me, my concern is in the residential area, not necessarily in the commercial district. I don't know how everybody else feels.
That's how I feel.
I would agree with that.
so you'd say that they're still permitted in all districts, but then you're going to make a distinction as to,
It'd be-
in the number,
Yeah, it'd be,
what is that? Um,
1C,
Okay, it's short-term lodging permitted to 25 rentals per unit annually.
Yeah, I guess the question there, for me, is relative to our conversation with Jay last time. What constitutes a lodging establishment versus,
well, we could put rent, I think we did talk about using rental versus lodging in terms of terminology.
yeah.
Yeah, well, we're gonna have to look at all of our definitions that,
Well, lodging is in fact a business.
Right. And it has different requirements in terms of the fire code. So then the question would be if someone's specifically looking to do this as a commercial venture, do they have to satisfy the lodging requirement? Again, that's kind of detail that I'm not sure I'm comfortable with right now.
For instance, I mean, B&B across the street's not gonna be real happy if these people are getting away with it and they're not. DA had to follow all kinds of rules and regulations, and, the other people don't have to.
I talked to 3 in Jackson, and they're all, saying that the Airbnbs are affecting their business, and they have more controls. They, on their properties, and they pay taxes also.
Yep.
Because they're told to come to our meetings.
Mhm. Fine line.
So what we're trying to keep from coming is somebody building a structure specifically for short-term rentals, as opposed to.
A residential structure for short-term rentals.
Yes,
Not necessarily building,
but have
acquiring.
one or another. As opposed to somebody who has a house and instead of downsizing and moving, they just decide to
Rent a room.
rent a room or make an accessory apartment and rent that out.
Or decide that 4 months of the year they can live someplace else and charge a much higher rental.
Mhm.
But then somebody's saying for 3 or 4 months, and that really isn't quite as bad as.
No, I'm saying make it available for rental for 3 or 4 months. Because, a week in Christmas week and a week on this and a week on that might be enough to pay for the taxes for the whole year.
You get good renters.
If you get good.
Can I bring another subject up? Which, I got cream for this last time, but my wife insisted that I bring it up. Dick, what time are the selectmen's meetings now?
4 o'clock,
What did they used to be?
3:30.
3:30.
I thought they used to be 7 at one time.
Oh, they used to
Long
be
time ago.
noon time, they used to be.
They used to be 5 o'clock, they used to be 7 o'clock, they used to be 4 o'clock, they've been all kinds of times.
All right,
Even when I've been
here's my
here.
point, I'll be right to the point. I think 7 o'clock is a very awkward time for us to have a meeting. And at the last time that I brought this up, the argument was, well,